Centuries ago, the grandmother of our Saviour, St. Anne, appeared to a little simple peasant in Brittany, Jean. And he, like my grandparents on my father's side, spoke not the main language of the whole country, French in his case, but only the Celtic language, Breton, which essentially is Welsh, got Frenchified over the centuries. And I was touched to hear how heaven spoke perfect Welsh. We used to say, Cymraeg di iaith y nefoedd. Welsh is the language of heaven. And there's some truth in that, insofar as Anne, the grandmother of our Saviour, spoke perfect Celtic. When, some years ago, there was a Eucharistic miracle in a village in Benin, in French-speaking Africa, the host at the doxology, at the end of the Eucharistic prayer, became visible flesh and blood, but it became Negro flesh. The Lord identified himself with a culture, with a people. And so it is that we need to do the same and respect what we find. Until the Reformation in England and Wales, faith and culture and society were all one. The liturgical year was celebrated socially, all kinds of ceremonies. It was interesting what went on. And it was intellectualized forcibly by authority when it had to become only a religion of the word and the mind. In Wales, however, they didn't manage to stop one thing, it was the singing. And I remember my grandmother singing me to sleep with the same song, an old Welsh hymn my mother used to use for me and for my nephew. It goes on from generation to generation. I remember when becoming a Catholic in school days that one of the great sufferings was to have to cope with not the same quality of Welsh, for the priests that we had tended to be learners, whereas we had the great Welsh in the Welsh pulpit of before, and it was a joy to hear. All those great preachers were part of the whole cultural scene, and many were great bards as well. The hymnology of Wales is of high quality. Way back in France, I received a postcard from St. David's, and I sometimes wondered whether ever it would be possible to come back to Wales. Strangely enough, that came to the fore recently when the Passionist retreat house at St. David's was becoming available. And there was a question of taking it over. But the Archbishop of Cardiff, I think, will take care of it himself. However, I did go to have a chat with him and he wanted to save it. But I remember wondering whether this culture could ever be used. Few really understand what culture is at that level. It's not enough to learn a language. One is born into a culture, and there's much more in the way of overtones and undertones than just grammatical forms. Indeed, the accent itself comforts. In the experience that the now Reverend Howard Storm had when he died, he found that he was being introduced unwillingly into unpleasant company, hostile company, bad language. How different that is from being born into a safe nest, the comfort of home, the solidity of strong roots. For in Wales, those roots often are in the ground itself, generation after generation of farming. Grandparents are important, and when society disintegrates, they can be shunted aside, as though we knew far more than those who went before us. But they hand on what actually we need. And if we don't hand it on ourselves, posterity is impoverished, and indeed souls also are at risk. For the grandparents knew something of what mattered, faith that keeps us safe. So this was written way back in the 80s in France, seeing this postcard of St. David's. And we know that the body of St. David is there. Apparently what happened was it was hidden to avoid desecration during the Reformation. And centuries later, a light indicated where it was, because they couldn't find it. It was actually in the wall, the thick, thick wall of the cathedral itself. And so it's still there, now honoured publicly. Dewi, didst thou once walk these pleasant fields on which I stood, and long to stand again? The beauty of the sound that my tongue yields in singing thy sweet name, to that fair strain of sacred unchanged language. Didst thou too once know its quiet magic? And did ears that heard these ripples form hear oceans woo the presence of this sound? To distant ears and distant lands like this, near which I sing, and whereon sang awhile its gentle tones, the mother of my king, as she reclaimed these Breton lands she owns. For heaven too this music doth record, there where words hold no more a heart outpoured. The ripples forming were those that formed at the birth of St. David, for St. Non gave birth there as best she could. She had this child, herself being a Holy Virgin of the Lord, was attacked, but she brought this child to birth, and where St. David was born, the ripples came, and St. Non's well is there, still performing miracles to this day. And that's where the Passionists have their retreat house, now becoming available. How different all this is to what the Reverend Howard Storm testifies to. Now, he had no faith, very little anyway, and he died in Paris. His organs were collapsing, and he had this journey into the beyond, and he found he was going the wrong way. And it was horrifying to hear these ghastly words of attack presence is becoming hostile. And one of the most unpleasant things, as he headed for what he described as the cesspit of the universe, was that it was bad company forever. Bad company. That's so different from parents and grandparents, the safe nest that the Lord wants us to have, and to have forever, for the family should go on. When one compares the language of beauty with that of the other side, we are at the antipodes of what is beautiful and what is ugly. And I remember being told this way back in 1991. It was something that had come to the surface, and that Father William, who had been novice pastor at Kilnacrot, wanted me to know about. There had been this drilling in the 80s in Siberia, and they wanted to go as far as they could into the bowels of the earth. And they had these very powerful machines to do that with, and also to record the tectonic movements there, the plates underneath. And what happened was this: despite the fact it had to be kept quiet, it did happen. They suddenly found that the machines were turning very quickly. That meant that they'd got to the end of solid ground, and they'd got into what was then becoming molten. And only for a few seconds, about 30 seconds, the recording still carried on until the end of the instruments melted. And so they had about 30 seconds of recording of what was picked up. And we hear, and it can be heard on YouTube, the howling of human voices in what presumably is the underworld, hell. It would make sense. I'm tempted to put it up, but it's on YouTube anyway and can be looked up if one looks up drilling in Siberia, the sounds of hell. And there we have precisely the antipodes of the language of heaven, which is harmony. Satan can't bear beauty, and so he will introduce his language even to the house of God. Thumping noises, jarring noises, not harmony, which is one of the few things that we've kept from Eden. We can still have this joy in common with the angels of producing joy on earth in perfect harmony. The deepest hole in Siberia. There is a place beyond the ancient sea of ours that lapped our shore, where souls before, well bound, are found to walk eternity alone amid the many, where the store of memories known is all that can be known to be the grounds for floundering in this tide of days that came and went. There where is shown the one horizon vast as it is wide. There is a place that we thought far away, a world beyond our world, but now I hear that some did thither bore upon a day, and others did thence swim away in fear. For 'neath the sea a part of earth remains, and waves but lap a land of once.